Okay, everyone, we're going to get started as some people upstairs finish getting some refreshments. They'll join us. So, as this is the last of our the Plentitude of Plenty lectures we had, I am going to personally dispense with giving my own definition of plenty as it may pertain to architecture and Taubman College and these times and this semester. Also, I know that our guest Heather Dodd is going to address plenty directly in her presentation, so I'm going to leave that up to her. And I'll give a brief introduction just to get us going. So Heather Dodd established her architectural firm Savage Dodd with her partner Colin Savage in Johannesburg, South Africa, either in 1997 or 1998. It depends on where you check on their website. In the immediate post-apartheid period, a movement toward a democratic state. This was a period of rapid transformation, as well as uncertainty and insecurity. While one might ascribe the term plenty to the transfer of wealth, power, land, and governance from a minority to a majority population, an equal sharing of the siloed abundance, I believe, and Savage and Dodd's work demonstrates, that plenty is a more complex and nuanced term. The work necessary for a radical transformation of the apartheid city is a project of regeneration through an engagement with politics and policy, and a willingness to unmake in order to remake, and a desire to create something utterly new through small-scale actions, adaptive reuse, and the extraction of value from previously undervalued infrastructures, resources, and materials. I'll also add that it is not only an issue of regeneration, but also of generational work over many decades, many generations, and many political regimes. I first met Heather around a banquet table in a beautifully restored and transformed convent in Lisbon at the end of the World Architecture Festival in 2022. It was a long event with lots of speeches and congratulations. The food wasn't great. So we bonded over housing, how we teach here at Taubman College, and how they design at Savage and Dodd. This is an architectural firm I did not know at the time. So checking out their website immediately upon returning to my hotel room, I was immediately taken by the work. But it wasn't until I had the opportunity to read her recently completed practice-based dissertation that I understood the full depth and breadth, as well as the incredible strategies and tactics that the firm employs to accomplish their work of restorative justice through design. As we stayed modestly in touch over the next several years, I learned that she would be coming to the United States for this year's episode of WAC, which took place in Miami, kind of an odd place, but nonetheless in Miami. And the timing was perfect to invite her to be the closing speaker of the Binda Lecture Series. As you will see from the lecture, Savage and Dodd's work, as they say, encompasses buildings within the public realm, such as universities and social housing, which are reflective of new building types for a new society. The work of their firm has received numerous awards locally from for example, the South Africa Institute of Architects, to internationally from the World Architecture Festival and the International Union of Architects, among many others. Along with her practice, she teaches at the University of Johannesburg Graduate School of Architecture. The takeaway lessons, I think, of my brief introduction here is that our world is very small, first of all, and it's worth going to banquets in beautiful spaces with so-so food. By that I mean sometimes networking is as simple as turning to your table mate and having a conversation, and I hope that after Heather's presentation we'll be able to have a brief one today, which will continue into the future.
Is it? Oh, great, thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation to speak at Taubman. I'm extremely honored, and thank you to all that made this possible, and thank you for the wonderful introduction, Sharon. In this talk, I'm going to reflect on the theme of plenty, using my work and perspectives gained through my PhD, Small Moves, and the lens of Southern urbanism. Plenty as a state of mind, as a state of possibility within a terrain of complexity and contradiction. The practice of Savage and Dodd Architects was started in the mid-90s and has tracked the emergence of democracy in South Africa. As such, our practice is of a particular time and place, reflective of the zeitgeist of a period in the history of our city and country. I live and work in Johannesburg, a city of approximately 6.5 million people, within a larger metropolitan area of 14.8 million. Johannesburg is a very young city, arbitrarily placed through the accidental discovery of gold in the 1880s, located on a river of gold rather than any natural resources like a river or a port. Johannesburg is a place of both enormous opportunity and extreme challenges. It's not an easy place in which to work, but it presents a large spatial and material resource. The context for our work is the city, and primarily the inner city. Our focus has been on creating places for people, architecture with a little a, enabling ordinary lives within an extraordinarily complex context. The importance of agency, of people having choice, flexibility, and variety in their environments is key to this. Enabling community and neighborhood. We have built a specialist practice focused on social housing, the adaptive reuse of buildings into housing, and the provision of new university buildings. We believe our architecture and our city should be adaptable, equitable, and resilient. Our tactical approach has enabled us to identify design elements in our projects that incrementally change the relationships of buildings to the urban realm. This is a practice of small moves, about finding the things you can change. Working within the context of the post-apartheid city, we have developed an ability to read and respond to the changing dynamics of the city, to spot the gaps that enable opportunity. But why and how is much more important than what. The theme of this talk is around the concept of plenty. What does this mean, and how do we use architectural practice to speculate on this? I'm going to frame the talk in relation to spatial inequality and the housing challenge, how we tactically approach these wicked problems, and the opportunities presented by the resources of the city that may enable plenty. In order to do this, I need to situate my practice within a specific socio-political context. What does plenty mean? Plenty of what? Plenty for who? Do we live in a state of abundance or scarcity? At the heart of plenty is equity. And just to situate myself, coming from the southern tip of Africa to where we are now. And within the complex global debates on plenty, abundance, sustainability, and resources, approximately 70% of the buildings that will exist in Africa in 2040 have yet to be built. And this map is scaled to show the actual size of the Earth's land masses, rather than the Mercator map of the previous slide, and this reveals the scale of this challenge. South African cities are amongst the most unequal in the world. This is a legacy of embedded spatial inequality, where racial and economic geographies have remained stubbornly, virtually unchanged, even within a democratic dispensation. I grew up during the apartheid era, a period of legislated racial segregation, started in 1948, but built on the back of a colonial legacy of separation. This is a picture of city officials in the 1950s all male, all white, holding a map planning the resettlement of non-white residents into township areas, away from the city center. They are using maps to assert control over space and people. It's a complex legacy which we continue to navigate. Apartheid at its base was spatial by design. And I use the word design purposefully because it is through design that we navigate spatial transformation, asymmetry, equity, and justice. Design matters. Johannesburg is a quintessential edge city, conceptually from its founding as a mining camp, and structurally through its colonial and apartheid legacies of racial segregation. Space was used as a tool to segregate and divide. These diagrams show the outcomes of what the maps in the previous slides were planning, where the slide on the left shows how the townships, such as Soweto, were considered as dormitories to house black labor. The mining belt shown in yellow, was used as a structural device to separate the white city from the black townships. And the post-colonial, post-apartheid city on the right retains a legacy of spatial division with the post-apartheid era housing built on the outskirts of the city on cheap land. Instead of housing, stitching our divided cities together, we created an extended edge city. So I graduated in 1992. The period leading up to the birth of democracy and the new South Africa was a period of extreme turbulence, violence, and uncertainty. And the beginning of my career trajectory coincided with this political transition. And my practice has been informed and enabled by the opportunities afforded by political and policy changes that were required in the period leading up to and after the birth of a new democratic South Africa in 1994. Thus, it could be argued that our practice is a political practice that has surfed the shifting socio-political landscapes of the past 30 years. And I'm reminded of the solidarity shown by the students right here in Ann Arbor at the time with the anti-apartheid movement, where students here were protesting and demanding the university divest from companies doing business with South Africa. And indeed, it was these economic sanctions that led to the end of apartheid in 1994. On the left, images of campus protest in 1985 at the University of Michigan, and on the right, the University of the Witwatersrand in 1987, where I was a student. By saying that our practice is political, I mean that our practice was closely in line with the development imperatives of the time and enabled by new policies that in some cases we helped shape. Political in that our work took a stance in opposition to the ideological ambitions that public buildings, public space, and housing embodied during the apartheid era, and made design moves to engage alternative approaches that began a transformational agenda. At the base of this was a questioning of what in a post-apartheid democratic architecture, which was more inclusive and people-centered, might look like, not only by ourselves, but also by our peers. These moves were made as conscious design decisions in pursuit of this. This has been the foundation of our practice. And indeed, this piece of writing on the left-hand side has been something that I've had on the wall of my office for 25 years as a guiding sort of touchstone. Transformation means setting the preconditions to make room equally for everyone. And the key question then is not how we design, but why we practice in this context and how our spatial practice has been performed in this space. Our work has been driven by a new perception and vision of the city, one that was more fluid and mixed use and transcended the boundaries and edges that had previously defined one's place in the city. I observe the fluid, ever-changing dynamics of the city. I steal with my eyes and look from buildings to the street, and I try and decode the complex mix of formality and informality to engage in new models, ways of seeing that inform my tactical approach to design within these contexts. I see opportunity and challenge in tough environments. New policy frameworks intended to overturn the spatial legacy of apartheid provided an enabling environment to explore a series of new building typologies and genres, thinking about publicness and inclusion in spatial terms. Our housing policy was embedded in a rights-based approach, where the right to adequate housing on a progressive basis was enshrined in the Constitution. This is critical, as in the immediate post-apartheid era, we saw the rollout of a technocratic housing delivery process that reinforced the patterns of the apartheid city and created an extended edge city. And we asked ourselves, what are the alternatives to this, and how can we make a difference? So the post-apartheid city is an extended edge city of informally led density on the edges. And here I have overlaid a tracing of the census mapping on a map of Johannesburg, highlighting in yellow the mining belt, which drove the city's layout. Thus, spatial transformation is both an underlay and a key driver of our mode of practice in terms of access to housing, transformation of city buildings, and how buildings relate to the public realm. We chose to situate our practice within the urban realm, and specifically social and urban housing. In doing so, our approach sought to leverage gaps in policies and ways of working, situating our practice at the intersection of policy and practice, with the two constantly informing and interrogating each other. Sometimes we help write housing policy and design guidelines. This is a way into housing design, the Trojan horse. Ours is a tactical practice. So how do we tactically make more with less? How do we use architectural practice to speculate on this? I'm going to try and use some of our housing work to show how we begin to approach some of these wicked problems and the opportunities presented by the resources of the city that may enable plenty. Elangeni social housing was the first inner city housing project. This was a model for social housing, housing that was urban and began to rethink the relationship between housing and the city. This was a real alternative to the little boxes. This was an infill project and had the potential to influence urban regeneration in the inner city. It is designed as a perimeter block morphology, forming a large-scale private internal courtyard. And we wanted to seed neighborhoods through social housing interventions, but the social housing subsidies only provided funding for units, and housing should be much, much more than this. Finding a gap within the subsidy structure was the key to unlocking a way to create a mixed-use development, shops, cross-subsidizing a playground and creche, challenging the limits of the social housing subsidy and the planning regulations to maximize and optimize the potential space. By broadening the definition of a unit to include a live-work unit, shown in the plan on the bottom and the middle diagram, we introduced an active street-facing shop edge, but this was funded as a unit. And this unit prototype was designed as a garage-sized shop on the ground floor, linked by an internal staircase to a one-bedroom unit above. This allowed for economic cross-subsidization to fund the on-site community facilities, but it does more. The live-work element engages the building into the city, creating a dialogue between the inside realm of the housing and the outside street. The design of the units is modular, and by introducing a loft unit, we maximize the height of the building within the constraints of the building regulations, which allowed a 4-story building without a lift. So this is a tactic to steal space, a 5-story building within this envelope, maximizing the number of units within the footprint. Here, the inside of the courtyard, unfortunately still dominated by parking in our context. I think parking is the thing that kills housing in every context. And Brickfield's housing, our next project, integrated towers with walk-up units, creating a series of smaller spaces between buildings and a larger scaled neighborhood regeneration ambition. Things that make housing work: a safe environment, places for children to play, a creche, a homework room for older children, places you can hold a meeting, a shop where you can buy essentials. Eyes on the courtyard and street. Here the same principles at a larger scale in brick-field social housing. And in the end, architecture that becomes part of the background of the city. Plenty, making room for more. The city is changing fast. It is incrementally densifying through a process of adding multiple units onto residential stands and multiple occupancies. And this has pushed, amongst other factors, affordability and a need to find a space to live. This is called backyarding and illustrates the intensity of the housing challenge. This photo is taken in one of the older suburbs of Johannesburg, and on the right-hand side of the slide in the backyard, you can see this sort of strip of mostly informally built rooms in the backyards. These are buildings that are built to sublet what you would actually call ADUs. And there are many opportunities to reimagine existing buildings and infrastructure in terms of their reuse and densification. In Cape Town, a new bylaw has been enacted in former township areas to allow the rights to develop additional units on residential sites, what you would term ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And as you can see, many properties already have secondary rentable units, but most often these are not approved and they're informally constructed shacks. So the point about this is that by the city legitimizing this and finding a mechanism for it, you can finance it. And that has huge transformational possibilities. So the city's actually following the agenda set by the people. And what we have been doing is working with an impact fund to develop a quick iterative design process, getting the basics right, that can provide streamlined professional services into a market that has not been served by architects. The market we are targeting are micro developers and housing entrepreneurs. And here we're taking our modular approach to housing design used in our social housing projects to develop a prototypical approach. We are working with the city to try and streamline approval processes to make them more efficient and affordable, transparent, and easy to understand. Illustrating the potential to leverage existing infrastructure, making room for more. The possibility of plenty in a terrain of contradiction. For a multitude of reasons, many buildings in the inner city of Johannesburg deteriorated in the early 2000s and became known as bad buildings. Sometimes they were vacant, sometimes occupied, sometimes hijacked. And in addition, in the post-apartheid era, corporate flight and deindustrialization left many inner city office and industrial buildings vacant. And these structures have become a valuable resource, material and spatial, for reuse, primarily as housing, with the potential to drive change at multiple scales and economies. This shift transformed the city from a place of work to a place of living, enabling spatial transformation. And I see opportunity and challenge in tough environments. These are stories of recycling, resuscitating, and repurposing, exploiting the possibility of plenty in a terrain of contradiction. After completing our first inner city new build social housing projects, we turned our attention to the decaying inner city housing stock, resuscitating, rehabilitating, while holding on to a vision of urban regeneration. Social housing companies and early investors were able to acquire buildings very cheaply. This building, Crest Hill, located in Hillbrow, illustrates the process of rehabilitating a modernist building. It's located in a suburb called, or an area of the inner city called Hillbrow. It's an area of dense high-rise buildings, and these photographs were taken in 2005. So it was purchased by a social housing company from the city for less than $1. The building was hijacked and occupied for 6 years before eviction and rehabilitation began in 2007. And this posed critical questions. When does a building stop being viable? How much value lies in its structure? In the photographs of these on the right. The first intervention focused on rehabilitation without altering the building's internal configuration. And in 2018, the building was given another refurbishment with modifications made to the unit configuration and the facade replaced, extending the life of the building further, making space for more affordable housing options in this part of the city. In upgrading buildings, the need to stabilize and upgrade the immediate urban environment became evident. This marked a significant shift. Investments could not stop at the building level. A wider, more impactful, precinct-based approach was needed, fostering community, security, and long-term sustainability. This was about reclaiming public space. Here the street, alleys, and the spaces between buildings were the focus. The urban realm that was formed by the buildings but had become divorced from them. These spaces were dirty, with broken infrastructure, not cleaned or managed by any entity, including the city. So this was deliberately not a design-led process, but rather a process focused on facilitating networks of urban governance that would potentially result in physical change within the urban realm. The only physical outcome of this initial process was the Ikaya recreational area, identifying the end of Peterson Street, which was the end of the road where Crest Hill in the previous slide was, as a potential area that could be closed off and the parking relocated. We proposed stealing this space to insert a ball court and a pocket playground. And this was a form of tactical urbanism. My friend Josie Adler is a community facilitator, and we worked with her walking the streets at that time and looking to how we could do this project. Not the small project, but the networking of buildings altogether. Unfortunately, sadly, this area has once again deteriorated. We continue to work in this area, and this is a building that has effectively been abandoned, although accommodating many people in extremely poor housing conditions. And it's in the same street as Crest Hill where the ball court shown previously was developed. It kind of shows you that unless you do fix buildings, you can't sustain the work that you've done. Our design practice is grounded in observation of how people occupy the buildings we have designed, as well as those we hope to reconfigure. This is a plan of the building in the previous slide. Here we measured up this building with a view to redeveloping. And in these large units that had 3 bedrooms, living and dining spaces, developed in the 1940s or the 1950s, every room is inhabited by multiple families. In Bannon Court, the nature of multi-occupancy of apartment, room, and apartment as village is revealed. And it challenges how we might think about the design of housing units, how we might think about room in the city, how we might think about how people live in the city. And there are many advert walls where space is advertised, revealing the shifting space of home and what it means to have room in the city and the housing squeeze. And these insights inform an iterative, prototype-driven design process, responsive to the changing patterns of life. In our housing adaptive reuse projects, we identified a series of what we term tactics for transformation that illustrate the approach and design tools used to form new hybrid typologies in pursuit of adaptive transformation of buildings and, by extension, urban fabric. These included joining buildings together, densifying through rooftop extensions to maximize the FAR, cutting out courtyards, and infill strategies. And all of these buildings were former office or industrial buildings converted to housing. The impact of this practice of adaptation is changing the inner city into a more complex and dynamic mixed-use fabric, where both formal and informal processes contribute to a nuanced understanding of urban transformation and the diverse actors driving it. In this way, the built environment is reshaped building by building, gradually reconfiguring the functionality of the city itself. Perhaps best understood as a form of urban repair, a long-term process of addressing spatial inequality. Our strategy is to maximize the potential of the building envelope, working within the floor plate as a site and the roof as real estate. We create inner courtyards by extracting slab areas, while maximizing potential through rooftop additions. We are working from the inside out and are in fact engaged in the act of making space for more. The rooftop units. Working within an existing floor plan is sometimes like solving a big puzzle. This illustrates how a range of family configuration and affordability levels can be accommodated within a single building, from self-contained units to cluster units, which are 4 to 6 rooms sharing bathrooms and kitchens, and rooms with shared amenities. The next project is a project called Pan-Africa House, and what I call a multifunctional hybrid. It's a new typology in the inner city of Johannesburg, driven by the migrant diaspora and Ethiopian and Somali communities that have set up buildings in this area and indeed changed buildings informally, and over a period of time they have changed this area of the city. And this project shows how the combination of a complex mixed-use program and manipulation of the building envelope through insertions and extractions results in a multifunctional hybrid. What do I mean by that? These slides show how the retail was reorientated, the original building on the right hand of the slide. So the original shops were cut into small kiosks that faced the street, and with an arcade cut through the building, which created an inner street. So the back of the shop's now arcade was facing inwards with a new piece that was built in to face this arcade. And with new staircases connecting 3 floors of retail that themselves sometimes were inhabited by micro-retail, in this case an Ethiopian coffee shop. With the arcade repeated on the upper retail floors, accommodating shops and restaurants. The building's footprint is maximized by the additions in purple, with 5 floors converted to residential above. And working on projects like these, where a building is subjected to major physical changes resulting in a completely new understanding of its function and place in the city, challenges us to think differently about established ways of working and thinking about how buildings function within the changing economies of the city. And we've spent the last 20 years or so reusing and repurposing buildings in the inner city of Johannesburg in new ways to serve a new and different purposes. And thus we observe, reinterpret, repurpose, and insert back into the city. But what are the preconditions for plenty? Do we merely set the stage, put in place what I call good bones that enables change over time? This is the adaptive reuse of a 1980s shopping center for affordable housing. It was no longer functional as a shopping center, but had some of the elements that would potentially make a nice place to live. Verandas, treed outdoor space. And the existing deep space plan of the building presented both challenges and opportunities. An existing school in the grey area was left in place. Whilst the volumes of the existing spaces presented the opportunity for internal vertical optimization of the unit space, and the volumes of the existing spaces presented the opportunity for loft rooms, courtyards were cut into the existing building, creating a network of open space the courtyards and the units in the former shops. Here we aim to set the preconditions for future change. Knowing that we have a small budget, we make a unit that is flexible for future adaptation. And a happy client in our photo shoot. I've spoken about a tactical approach of small moves related to finding opportunities for transformation and change. But I think that, particularly in our context, making space for plenty also has to do with a sense of publicness and awareness of the edges of space. The last project that I'll show you is Solplaatje University. It's located in the Northern Cape. It's the largest province in our country with the smallest population. It's where diamonds were founded in the 1870s. It's extremely dry with extreme temperatures, as in really very hot and really very cold. So where you would seek shade under a tree. And Solplaatje University is one of 2 new universities established in post-apartheid South Africa. It was created to expand access to higher education. The campus is designed as an open campus, integrated into the town, envisaged as a catalyst for urban regeneration. So the city becomes the university and the university of the city. And it's quite unique in our context, where most of our campuses are within our cities, but are campuses with edges that are closed off. And actually, interestingly enough, when we did this project, when we first met with the council, they said, and what happens if there's a student riot? And we said, it hasn't been a student riot for 20 years, 10 years, there's no student riots. Anyway, just as we finished the project, then the fees was fallen, the university was a bit trashed. So, you know, the students here are mostly first generation. Their families have not been to university. It's a very new experience for them. The first phase of the university was completed in 2016 with a series of buildings completed by 5 different firms of architects working to a common urban framework. So this is a multifunctional university building with a residence, teaching spaces, dining hall, and offices, facing onto an internal courtyard and interfacing with the external square, which you saw in that slide. We explored new university building types as being multi-purpose, flexible spaces that encourage the sharing of resources and combine teaching, living, and social life. It's that serendipitous exchange that's really important in universities that we wanted to enable in space. And a university is informed by the rhythms of life on campus over a 24/7 cycle. So these vignettes on the left were generated as part of the competition phases of this project. And we tried to place a series of imagined characters into the space of the buildings we imagined. And our whole competition strategy was driven by this narrative. We considered what a building could be in terms of typologies that would encourage connectivity and social learning, spaces that might stimulate cross-disciplinary exchange, dynamic containers of student life that dissolve the traditional boundaries between formal and informal space, and place the students at the heart of the learning experience in an integrated live, learn, play, work environment. Places to pause. Subsequently, we photographed spaces, the students using the spaces. And this is part of our practice of observation and reflection. The edges of the building, colonnaded and shaded, linking to the public external square. A piece of storytelling etched onto the steel plate, shading the colonnaded space. So this is a plate that provides space onto these very big shop fronts. And what we did is we etched a visual story that combined the stories of the very ancient rock engravings that are prevalent in this area. So this area has some of the most ancient rock engravings. It's where fire, the evidence of fire being first used by humans is. So it's got this extremely ancient history, and then it also has a colonial legacy of extraction from the diamonds. And we put that all together in this little piece of storytelling along the edge of the building. The integration of artwork into the building, or pieces, elements of the building that could be seen as pieces of artwork, was very important. And the movement sequence from the outside through into the inner courtyard, ending in a veranda that's considered as an outdoor room, linking a large-scale indoor public room to the courtyard below, with a screen that moves in the wind, creating a muted colored shadow. So this is sort of an interstitial space between this very large-scale internal, and I like to think that it's an internal public square, if you like. It's a multi-purpose space that could be used for graduation, be used for dancing, playing ping pong, and exams, and then the space below, the actual courtyard. A multifunctional indoor space, functioning almost as an indoor town square. And when I say, coming back to buildings to look at them, to see how they function, it's exactly what we've done over the times that we've been able to go backwards and forwards, because we don't live in Kimberley. We have to fly there. But just seeing how people use it over a period of time, thumping music on a Saturday morning, how it's been set up for different things. And what we also tried to do was to reflect the landscape of the cave in this room. So we've got the floor as a landscape, and these skylights above that actually have a printed tree on them. They cast a shadow of a tree onto the floor. This is an architecture of layered spaces, and I'd like to think that this creates room for plenty. Thank you. So, I mean, we have quite small budgets in our book. So at the level of let's say, the unit, we're really designing the model of the unit, designing the space of the unit, and it's part of everything that we would want to do. But we need to make sure that the way we put it will enable it to sustain whether it's time, not in the way of an open building, but rather. And that also the spaces will also, university spaces are maybe fluid enough that they enable a lot of different activity and can be changed over time. I mean, I can see that in our university buildings, the office buildings, maybe in the future in the country of this house, this really is going to be worked on as an office building, maybe actually or maybe the residents actually in the right place there in Mill, and maybe the residents is actually office. So I think that's kind of flexibility at our design is non-specific, but that you can change. And I think that the buildings, the older buildings that we worked with, came from the 1950s and 60s. Are very flexible in a way. I mean, their structures are simple, and they're quite easy to work with. Even the more modern buildings like the 1950s, much more determined structurally, design-wise, the spaces were wider, quite difficult to work with. So I think things can change over time. I mean, I know that the shopping centre project that we showed you, there's lots of things that could happen to that. I mean, we couldn't have got the blocks in every unit, for example. But that's not to say that, over a period of time, the owner can't start to put those in. And, maybe in the future, maybe those are too small and we have bigger units that we couldn't quite do that. And we could not go into. So there's always, I think, that the change is enabled through that. So the housing that you saw on the side, that were sort of the little boxes, if you like, those were developed in post-apartheid, the immediate 1990s period, where the government said they were going to build 1 million houses in 5 years. They didn't quite get that far, but I think it was about 7 years. But it was all developer-driven, engineering-driven, no architects and no urban designers involved, and that's the part that was really scary for extended history because it wasn't integrated with housing. Housing was leading us, but they weren't thinking about being able to see all those kinds of things because it wasn't an integrated development business. That's why we couldn't, we always wanted to show, and I'm thinking about myself and some of my peers, we were saying this is not the right way to do housing. There's got to be an alternative. And always when you say there's an alternative, then people say, well, what's the alternative? Show us the alternative. Show us the model. There's cabinet, whatever. But social housing for us is a crucial model. And that was about, urban inner city housing that then could integrate other things. So there, that's owned by a housing association, then manages the whole city. Whereas those little boxes were given to people. The work that we're doing in Cape Town now is for people that own small houses on site, and so they will be enabled to develop units on the back of their site, so if they have an empty site, they can go and sure that it's going to work. And hopefully, the jury's out, but hopefully we can provide a better outcome than is already. And hopefully, as we go, I mean, we're doing a little into new development at the moment, and hopefully it's very tight. It's almost for that, but it's flexible enough that a unit could become important for shop or something, and or a unit doesn't really matter. So, Brixton's at the time was one of the biggest social housing projects that was being developed. It was trying to develop more inclusionary housing approach, and not all subsidized housing with incredibly complex financial modeling was worked out. And first with an urban design framework that we were given and said, do that, and it didn't work. So, eventually we actually sat down and said, okay, that's a bit hard. And we quickly for the different areas, and then we said, okay, well, there's the problem, and then we kind of worked out, and the design was kind of a design perspective, and then it's about how do you make architecture, how do you make spaces. And then hopefully, with the impact of that, is very close to a transfer to a new bridge that was in place. So it had a very good, a very stable community that lived in Bedford. But the immediate area to the west, a lot of development, so it had a very big impact on that, but lately there's been quite a lot of issues going on in the immediate area, and it's not something that's worth doing. What was the other one? The Kaya. So Kaya came after the fact that the Johannesburg housing company had built rehousing the whole building in the same street. And then, it's those kind of fundamental issues of urban regeneration, in fact, that you've got the one is the witness farm where you do the house usually upgrade and work with out in neighborhood production. But the opposite one is if the neighbors sewage running into your basement, obviously it doesn't take you have a problem. So that was about sort of really networking. So in fact, then starting from looking at the lanes in buildings and the just full of rubbish, and nobody was cleaning them, and then walking and trying to figure out where the problem. So we start with where are all the buildings and who owns what. It's all good as issues, but it wasn't so easy to walk and actually put all the buildings together. Who owns what? It's mapping that and seeing where we could find linkages. And then talking to everybody from the sort of the people who are managing the building to the possible people owning it, and then seeing it essentially as a set of improvements. architecturally, it wasn't enough to concentrate. But I went in with the mindset that I don't know what's going to come. It's not a word to go to the market. And you can walk around the building. We'll meet some in and see what happens. But actually what we and I have noticed is that in previous attempts where the city has put certain design interventions, whether it might have been a bollard or they've rerouted the streets or made it do that, they've made it much more dangerous than flop. And it wasn't actually very positive. So it was about, not trying to come and say, oh, well, we need to do that, but maybe that can be put in. So this is a drawing of a model of the and in the end I had to reduce new objects. It was about what can characterize the design process, and I talked about retail, not your design elements. But I think that's about sort of the design and culture sort of embedded. But for me, I'm a hand drawer. So with a dinosaur. So I mean, they give you a kind of a direction. You kind of define the way into it. And you live in I think it's all about sort of using your brain and your finding out
No, having said that, no, that's not true. I've got a project manager that we work a lot together. And if you can use some of the contractors that you use for the weekly life. But I've got quite a kind of, I've worked quite a professional that works. These contexts that we work with, it's nice to have. We find that if we don't use our little team of people, we just go to a building. We give it a hand to context or so people who estimate the cost of the team. And if we go to a non-conventional commercial person, the other side of the and they don't become stories and no. So in these projects of conversion, it's all private sector clients, and they bought buildings because they're building a portfolio on top of windows. The medium scale developers and they've got a couple of hundred, couple of thousand units, and then there's a bank that was set up in 2003 in Johannesburg and operates now in all of the inner cities in South Africa. It's based on a core bank model that was Cardiff. And they're only funding in the city and they've got a very specific funding model. So that opens up the space for other banks to realize funding up their debt funding from those banks. So it's and that opens up the space for us to have the cheapness of building, the availability of funding, and the funding has enough in it. So where we're actually stuck at the moment because we've got 500 at least buildings in the city of Johannesburg that are occupied or have that for what the 10 months and that needs to be reworked and so on. And we're considering to be very complex. But that's the scale of disaster and opportunity that we have. And then I guess, all cities have this opportunity because the fact of the matter is that older cities were set up with these buildings and they're no longer fit for purpose. They're no longer offices, they're no longer factories. You don't have sewing machines in your factories anymore. Amazon comes to town, they want
pretend we're giving the lecture again.